Welcome, everyone. Today we are doing our Demystifying the Nominating Committee. We're joined by Stacy Delvecchio, who is the Nominating Committee Chair, and Heather Bernardin, who is the Nominating Committee Chair-elect. We do have everyone on mute, but please do use the chat to ask questions and to dialogue with each other. Erica Brackman and Heather will both be monitoring the chat. And I think once we get through some formal presentation, then we will move on to questions. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Stacy Delvecchio.
Hold on, Karen.
Right.
I'm not seeing the chat. Oh wait, there. Never mind. Sorry.
All right, and we are going to share. Okay, did that come through?
You did.
Yep.
All right. So, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever it may be. My intent was to, there we go. Okay. So I'm Stacy Delvecchio, and I am the Nominating Committee Chair, and I'm joined, like Karen said, by Heather Bernardin, who is my Chair-elect. And we are both going to go through this. We have some prepared materials, and then we're going to at least allow 30 minutes for questions, but what we want you to do is enter those in the chat feature versus unmuting and going online, and then that way we can combine some of them together that way. So we're going to start off. This is just our brief agenda. We do have several questions on the timeline and the process, what makes a good application, that sort of thing. And Heather's going to go through some of that, and then I'm going to go through some of it, and then we'll get into the questions. And like I said, hopefully allow about 30 minutes for questions. I do want to say that this is what we see as the first of communication on how we're doing, vetting candidates, that sort of thing for leadership pipeline, because the nominating committee is not all there is regarding the leadership pipeline. So after the first of the year, there will be another SWE leader that'll join you and go through some of the other ways that we have society leadership and how that works. So with that, I'm going to control the slides here, Heather. So we'll start off with this one.
So the first thing we wanted to tell you about is a bit what the nominating committee looks like. Previously, the nominating committee had a member from each region, and when regions went away, the decision was made to say 10 or more committee members. The committee actually decides each year how many members it wants or thinks it's going to need for the following year. The nominating committee vets those members and then sends the recommendations to the board, who does the actual appointment. So those 10 members are voting members. Then there's also the chair, which is Stacy, the chair-elect, myself, and Karen, the SWE CEO or executive director. We are involved with the nominating committee. We do a lot of the background items where we lead the discussions. Karen provides the inputs from headquarters, but we are not in the end voting members. So just to tell you a little bit about the makeup, I know there was a question about this in the pre-questions. Since these members do not come from the regions anymore, we try, based on the election manual, to have a variety of type of people to have a better swath of what the membership looks like. So there's people from small business, people from large corporations. The election manual recommends having a past president, someone from the board of directors. We'd like to try to have someone from academia, which we do have this year, someone with global experience. And this year we've added a member from the African-American AG has joined us on the committee. Next slide.
Are you ready? Okay.
Yep. So the timeline. So we are right at the very beginning of the timeline. During this point is the call for nominations. We spent June, July, and early August figuring out what needed to go in the call. That call went out. You should have all got that last Saturday. You have about a month for the deadline to get all your information in. And at that point, Stacy, HQ, and myself will check to make sure that everyone who put in a nomination is eligible. So if you don't meet the minimum eligibility requirements, which are in the bylaws, then you don't go any farther. We then, at that point, send out a call for feedback. This year it'll go to members and your references. It's up to you to make sure your references respond. And then we also start conducting the interviews. So the board of director positions will be interviewed first because those get vetted first, and then the other positions. So this is 1 year, this all happened in a 1 week time period. Now this is spread over several weeks to try to get everyone in. And if there's a scheduling issue, we can adjust with that. Then comes the big workload for the nominating committee, which is the vetting period. During this period, we go through all of the information that we gathered about you. We look at everybody. It starts out per the election manual that first we look at president-elect, because per the election manual, this is a non-contested position. So once that's decided, the committee then looks at the other board positions. Last year, we did all of that as a whole group. All 10 members did that together. Then after those positions are slated, we then go into the other positions, the Board of Trustees, the Senate leadership. Last year, to try to spread out the workload, because there's so many more with the governance changes that we're slating, we actually split into 2 groups. Those 2 groups slated what they felt was the best. Then at the end, we all came back and we did a last look at the slate. Sometimes there was a little bit of well, we like this person, but we think that, yeah, that person would fit better over in this position. So there's some of that goes into it. And during this time, we also decide whether or not some of the positions will be contested or uncontested. And I think we'll have a question about that later on that Stacy can address. At the end of all that process, no later than the end of January, all the nominees will be notified whether they were slated or not. If you were slated, you will be asked to accept that position at the time of your notification. It may not be the position you necessarily put in for. You'll see that there are some changes this year where we asked you to put in for your A position, but that doesn't mean you'll necessarily, you won't be considered for other positions. We had some feedback about the way we did the notification last year. It was the first year that we did not do written feedback. We are working on making that a better, more positive process, because we definitely we heard the message that did not go well. So how that notification will happen for people who were not slated is still undecided. Then in February, and this is based on a bylaws date, the slate will be announced no later than, I think, Stacy, February 2nd?
31st, yep.
31st, okay. Nobody knows the slate except for the nominating committee and headquarters until that request goes out. We don't tell the current board of directors, we don't tell the current board of trustees. Just the people who were notified know whether or not they're on the slate, and basically the nominating committee. At that point, it starts the petition period, which is why you see a big period of time before the voting starts. During that time, anyone who has been nominated will be asked for their likely be asked for their statement, their photo, their video. That part changes year to year what we ask you to provide for, and then after the voting ends, the election results are announced. Last year, we pulled these dates in a lot The board challenged us to do that. We're not sure we'll be able to do that this year without the in-person meeting on the Wednesday of conference. We'll still try. And the reason for pulling that date in is so that people that were not elected will have the opportunity to be a leader somewhere else within the society. Next slide. All right, so what do we do? There's a little bit of misconceptions about what we do. So we do vet the nominees for the board of directors, the board of trustees, Senate leadership, Senate, and the standing committees. We gather feedback for the people who put in for those positions. That feedback varies from year to year based on what the committee thinks is, basically the committee at the end of every year says what worked and what didn't work, and then it reevaluates for the following year. So that feedback may change, and that's a decision that's we make in July before we send out the call for nominations. We then prepare that slate, notify the nominees, notify people who were not slated. And then at the end of the year, after we've done all that, we update our forms, we update our process, and we update the candidates for the nominating committee members. And those candidates we get at the same time as the call for committee chairs. We don't vet any other leader positions in the society. We don't decide whether or not someone's electable. So we don't do any of the other, we don't mentor, we don't figure out what your next role is. If we don't slate you, we don't say, oh, we're putting you over in this other position. That's up to you to find a mentor and somebody, to help you with guidance on that. So I think that's it.
That's it?
Yep.
So we'll go into some of the process pieces of it regarding the application. And for those of you that have applied before, you know that it's always a little different. And part of that is just to make things better. So this year, one of the things that is new is a 2-minute video, and we're asking people to answer that question that's on the screen there about what diverse experiences or perspectives you bring to this specific position you're applying for, and how does it contribute to SWE's mission. So that's one piece of it. And then we have those items 1 through 4 on the screen that are pretty similar to past years, and it's about the goals and visions for the position. And really, we want it to be something that is unique to you, something that's not just, my vision is to make it the best, or my vision is to support the strategic plan. We want something more specific. So, why are you the best for that? And we don't want you just to say, the minimum qualifications, like I meet these minimum qualifications, because that doesn't add anything. If you think about the fact that the nominating committee is getting all this information for everybody, you want it to be something that's not just, not just a list of things that you've done that meet the minimum. We do ask for examples of the leadership competencies and how you fulfill that, so that's good. And then we want your professional resume and a SWE/service resume. You'll see threaded throughout here a lot that it's not just about all of these SWE experiences anymore. It is, the requirements and qualifications are opened up to what we say, or equivalent. And that was one of the changes what we went through with the governance changes, that it didn't have to just be about SWE experiences. We get that question a lot. Why don't you consider other organizations we've been in? And we do, but obviously we need to do a better job of sort of communicating that, because people still ask that question. So those 4 things there, the documentation, you put them all into one PDF and send them. And then we do ask for references. We've asked for references for a couple years, but last year was the first year where we actually reached out to them. And so those can be, it's 2 to 3 references. They don't have to be your SWE bosses or something, but we would like somebody, a SWE boss is good, but your regular boss is good. Colleagues, people who worked on teams with you, and those teams can be SWE teams or non-SWE teams. We want to know, we want to hear from somebody who has worked with you, who knows your quality of work and what you know. So think about who those references are, and make sure that the reference feedback is different than the membership feedback. And so the reference feedback, you get 2 to 3. And if they don't reply, then you've got a bit of a gap there. So you want to make sure that those references do submit something, and they submit something more than, I've known Stacy for 10 years and she's really dedicated to SWE. Because a reference statement like that really adds nothing to our vetting process. So speaking of tips and tricks, my little screenshot there is actually from the call for nominations that Heather mentioned went out on Saturday. So don't take that as that's the only bit of information, because there's more in that whole email. If you open it up, of course, it's got quite a bit of length to it. So what we want you to do, talk about your experiences and line those with what's needed in the call for nominations. So if you're choosing somebody, board of directors, look at those things that are on there and talk about that. Pull that into the statements that you give us so that we can connect the dots on where you've got the skills that are needed for that role. Like I said before, make sure your references respond to the feedback request, and make sure that it is meaningful feedback. And my example of somebody saying Stacy's been a SWE member for 10 years and is dedicated to this position, we do get that type of feedback, and it doesn't add much. It's pretty neutral, and so it's just, this poor person has taken the time to type it in, we've taken the time to read it, and it doesn't really add much. So we want something that lets us know, they're great at detail, they're great at follow through, they're committed to thinking outside the box. Something that's unique versus just sort of vanilla words. Please proofread your documents. It's not like as if we get the things that are just messy all over the place, but you're representing yourself in your written word with these documents, and you want to make sure that they are in good shape. And be clear. No matter what you do in the application, we want you to be clear, so that it's not a bunch of, like corporate lingo or some of the words that are all, hot buttons now. We want to be clear, get to the point, tell us what's good about you and why you need to be in that spot. And the thing that's in the box out there in the bottom, if it's not in your application, we don't know it. SWE has gotten to the size now where we don't know everybody that puts in, and this is a really good thing. But that means that you can't assume that, well, certainly they knew that before I was, SWE president, I was on strategic planning committee. I mean, people aren't going to know that unless you specifically tell us. And it's very important to do that with, there's plenty of opportunities for you to let us know the goodness of your experience. But if you don't put it in there, we just flat out don't know about it. And please remember that when you're putting together your package.
Include things besides your SWE experience as well with that.
Right.
That's just as important.
Right. I mean, we had somebody who had been on a community committee, and they were looking at tools and processes needed in the community. And there were some great examples, nothing to do with SWE. Actually, I don't think there was anything to do with engineering, but it was good as far as thinking of a plan, following through on a plan, working with the team, that sort of thing. So don't be limited by that. SWE members have asked for this for years, and we're finally at the place of saying, yes, we want to hear about it. So please share it with us, because that's what the change was all about. The other thing that is evolved over the past several years has been this interview. And Heather had alluded to the fact that it used to happen when we were at conference, and we moved to the point of doing a virtual interview just because we wanted to be sure that, number one, people are at conference to experience the conference, so it didn't get people bogged down with there, but also this made it more accessible to a lot of people, and then we could record it. So the interview is about 30 minutes in length. It's a little bit shorter than what we did last year, but we feel that 30 minutes should be fine. Heather and I will be the ones, so the nominee will be on the call, and then Heather and I will obviously be there. We'll take turns, asking questions, going through a follow through questions, that sort of thing, for clarity. The interviews are recorded, so the nominating committee members can dial into that live interview if they choose, but they will be on mute and you won't see them. So it's not like as if you're going to have 10 people staring at you on a Zoom call. But it is recorded because all of the nominating committee members do need to listen to that interview before we start the vetting process. So tips, be prepared. This is an interview and I want everybody to treat it as such. It is a big part of what we see from you as the nominating committee. So go back to my statement about we don't know you. You're going to have maybe nobody on the nominating committee knows you, and this is their chance to see how you present yourself, how you communicate, how you respond to questions that maybe you weren't expecting. And some of the roles, that's a big part. Some of the roles have a lot of communication needs and be able to be clear and concise. And so think of that. Sit down and think about the experiences that you want this committee to know about, in addition to all the written information you've shared or something you want to expand upon. This is your time to do it and for us to see you. So don't just go in saying, oh, I don't really know what this is, but I thought I'd apply. That's not a good thing. And I don't think you would go into an interview for a job for an engineer that way. So be sure you think about it that. Once again, convey why you're unique. Check your technology in advance. If you, you will get the email once you apply as far as what the technology is that we're using. So if you're not sure it's going to work, there's links to make sure that your computer's capable and all that type of stuff. And so you'll know that in advance. And there's always some sort of natural disaster that seems to hit. If you're in a hurricane area and something happens, obviously we don't hold that against you. But if you're just not prepared, that's not necessarily a good thing. So, and then the evaluation process. This is probably the part where people, they don't know what we do for the nominating committee, and it's not any big rocket science or any big mystery really. It's just we're evaluating the information we have. So we have all that information from the nomination package. Boom, the nominees have submitted that. And then we have the feedback. So we have the references that we talked about, the 2 to 3 people that are specific for you. And then we have the members and colleagues. So that's when, for years now, we've sent out the link that says, please provide feedback on these nominees. And anybody can submit something that if they know that nominee, what their opinion is of that person. So we have those 2 pieces of information. And then we have the interview. And then we also do talk to the current SWE leaders and ask them what is needed for this coming year. And when we talk with somebody like the SWE president, it's really what is best for SWE in this year between the president and the president-elect, what's coming forward. So some specific things. I look at, so obviously this year, diversity and inclusion has always been important, but it has been elevated much more than in the past. A couple years ago, global was big. We wanted to make sure that we had some more global experience. And so we would, consider that when we were vetting people. I know a couple years ago when we were looking at the Senate, we wanted to be sure that we had a bigger representation of ages and experience level and type of work and that sort of thing. So it really does change a little bit year to year. And so we did that 1 year in Senate, and then the next year we're like, okay, we've got that. Now we need to, kind of fill this gap. We've looked sometimes for executive leadership. So it really does change a little bit year to year, and it complements all those other things that we've got in there that you'll see in the call. And then really briefly here before we get into some of your questions, we got lots of time for questions, is just if you want to participate, obviously that call for nominations came out, so share it. If you've got somebody that you're like, I can't believe, Heather's never put in for one of these positions, share the call for them, encourage them to do it. The way that we do the nominations now, they are all by self-nomination, so you wouldn't actually nominate that person, but your encouragement can go a long, long way. I know that there had been several people for multiple years that had asked me things like, so are you going to ever run to be on the board of directors? Or are you going to ever run to be president? And those kind of things stick in your brain. And so when that call comes out and another person asks you, it really does make a difference. So encourage them to apply, share it with people. When the feedback question comes out, we want that meaningful feedback. So remember the word meaningful. You don't need to go on and on with a whole, dissertation sort of level, but provide something meaningful, knowing that the nominating committee gets so much information, and you want this to be not just, they're a great person and blah, blah, blah. And then if you really want to go to the next level, then you can apply to join the nominating committee, and we always welcome, new members. We like to see a big variety of people to apply, and that happens with the call for committee chairs. So it happens with the chairs based on the leadership level that we need for this committee. It does not happen when the call for committee members. So sometimes it's gotten a little lost, but we've only been doing that a couple of years. So we'll get better at making sure that we highlight that. All right, so we're going to go into the fun part here.
Yep.
And
we've got great. We've had a whole bunch of questions in the chat. Do take a look at the chat because some of the easier ones Erica answered.
Way to go, Erica. Thank you. Yes. Erica Breckman is a member of our nominating committee, so she's taking care of doing that while there's Erica.
Okay. So Stacy, the first one, what is SWE doing to gain more diversity on our slate? And what is the nominating committee's role to seek out diverse candidates?
That is the million-dollar question, I think. And, and I guess the good part is we are all in this together, and we are all working to move this forward, and we realize the importance. So I think that that's a good part. Let me start with the second part of that. What is the nominating committee's role in it? The nominating committee, as you can tell, hopefully from going through what we get, we're at the end of the process. We're at the end where people are like, yeah, this looks like a great thing for me, or this looks like a great thing for my friend Heather. And so you get nominated. And there's a whole lot of SWE experiences and SWE mentoring and coaching that goes on before that. So so it is not our job to go out and tap on people and tell them, hey, you should put your name in, we think you're a good candidate. That's not what we do. What we are doing, though, is relying on our SWE leaders to do that. And I would say a couple years ago, there used to be more of like a list to watch that we would have, and we would go out and tap on those people. And I think that's where some of that perception comes from, because it did happen. But as we've gotten bigger, that is just not a way to do it, because what happens is it just becomes kind of like a good old boy network, and we're just pulling people in. So what we're doing is we're relying on our SWE leaders to help pull in these diverse members and diverse experiences, ethnic, racial diversity, and that is the best way we can think of right now to get to a broader group of nominees. And it's all about pulling in those people. I'm 100% confident that there is much more, there are many more qualified candidates that are, of a diverse racial and ethnic background than what we see have nominees. And it depends on somebody tapping them on the shoulder and saying, you'd be really good at this. And that tap on the shoulder is usually best by somebody who knows them. And we don't know them. So for us to go out and do that, it wouldn't be good. So what are we doing about it? We are upping our game on reaching out to those SWE leaders. So like I said, even as recent as 2 years ago, we didn't do this. Last year, Anas Tarat was the nominating committee chair, and she did reach out to all the leaders in a, like an email saying, hey, this is out there. Please submit some people, and we're going to do more of that and provide a nominating committee member with somebody who maybe has some background with those SWE leaders to say, hey, think about this. We need you to submit people. Some of these people, we don't know them, and you need to submit them. So, and so when I look at it, I'm really happy with us going with this route of SWE leader and everybody being in it, because the nominating committee is not the one that's responsible for having a diverse slate. It's all of the SWE leaders. And if we just, start picking on people we know, it's going to be so riddled with bias, and it just perpetuates the same group of people, and that's not what we want.
Right. You actually led into the next two questions. First of all, why are some positions uncontested? For example, there are 7 senators, and last year there were only 7 senators slated.
Yeah, this is probably the question we get the most as the nominating committee. And it's a fair question because, you're being asked to vote. And if there's 7 senators and there's 7 that were voting, then why bother to vote? So if you go back to what we're looking for what's best for the society. And we do not take this lightly as a committee. Because we know everybody that's put their name in has thought about it and they've prepared all that information, and you're publicly putting your name out there that I'm running for this position. What can happen is, let's say that we want, so let's say there's 7 positions for Senate and we've got 10 people that are good. We do not even end up talking about somebody if they don't meet the requirements. So everybody that we discuss meets the requirements. So so let's say there's 10 people that sort of meet the requirements but are really good. Let's say 30 people put their name in, 10 make the top cut, but we can only elect 7. If there are 1 or 2 people in that group of 10 that we feel we would be doing a disservice to SWE if they did not get elected, then we start having this hard discussion about the only way we can make sure they get elected is to have an uncontested election. So it goes back to one of the things that was on our what does the committee do and what don't we do, and we said we don't choose our leaders. So when we start saying that, oh, we're going to have an uncontested election, you're like, well, basically you're choosing our leaders. But what we're doing is looking at what's needed for SWE and saying, if we put forward these 10 people, that means 3 of them will not get elected. And if there are 3 people, let's say we wanted to have at least somebody that had global experience, or let's say we wanted to be, we had 10 people and 2 of them were people of color. The only way that we can, and we need that, we have to have that in order to move our society forward. And in order to do that, you run the risk of having people that won't be elected. So we would go with an uncontested election. It's kind of a wordy answer, and I don't know if there'll be follow-up questions on that, Heather, but you can let me know.
So you mentioned member feedback. What should they do if a lot of their experience is not from SWE?
So we've allowed for that now, which is really exciting. The link that you get is anybody can click on it and fill in feedback. So it's not just open to SWE members. So if your richest experiences with the work that you've done at work, you can forward it to your boss. You can forward it to your team members. So you do not have to just have SWE members that are providing feedback. And we're excited about that. So take advantage of it.
Okay. So there's a danger of a hidden bias in favoring candidates who look like us or think like us, or members that the NomCom knows. What are we doing to combat the hidden bias?
Yeah, the hidden bias is tough. So let me talk about the unhidden bias. So I talked about how we don't know you. We only know what's in the nomination package that you submit. However, there are people that we know that submit. That just is inevitable because the people on the nominating committee typically have a lot of SWE experience and have been around for a while. So the first thing we do is we will identify. We'll say, I know this person, I've worked with this person, or this person's my friend. A lot of times we have a lot of SWE friends, and so we will identify that. And what we have seen is that we're so conscious, so this is on the conscious bias, we're so conscious and nervous about that, is that a lot of the committee members sometimes will just really sort of share less than we'd like them to. But with some prodding, then we're like, okay, we know that this is your friend, but what do you think about XYZ? So so part of our way to combat the bias that at least we know about is to share, what we've got. Or we might say, I really find it annoying when somebody interrupts. Okay, I have a problem interrupting, so I can say that one. So I really have a problem with that, and that's sort of my thing. So I don't want to immediately write off anybody that interrupts because that's my pet peeve. And the nominating committee has been really, really good about sharing that. And we kind of keep each other in check on that. The unconscious bias is a little bit more difficult. And once again, I think it's just a matter of keeping it in check. One of the things that is good is that because there's 10 voting members on the nominating committee, and it's pretty, there's usually so much discussion going on that we've got people checking each other, you know, like, oh, I don't know what you mean by that, or I totally didn't see that. And so there's a lot of sort of challenge of each other. That is the best way we've done as far as the bias. I don't think it's not like as if this is boom, we've checked that box, we're done with it, because it's probably something that we will always be working with to make sure that we're not bringing those biases in, but that's where we are right now.
All right. So Stacy, so there was a question about a good application. How does the nominating committee evaluate written statements from those that are non-English as a first language to make sure that we're conscious of the D&I situation there?
That's a good point. So the big thing is, so that is effective life, and that's probably the written part as well as the, it could come in the interview piece of it too. And I think with what we've tried to do to get some global experience on the nominating committee, that helps that. So people can be like, okay, let's not be overly critical of this person because they confused the pronouns or something like that, or, you know, pronunciation was a problem. And so it's more of a matter of checking each other. On the written part of it, I would go back and say the same thing. However, I would also go back and say there is a bit of responsibility on the nominee's part to have somebody else review it. Now, it could be that their network is also non-English speaking, so it might not catch some of the intricacies, but at least having one more person look at it is good. So we check ourselves with some of the experiences we have now with global to make sure that we aren't being over, you know, not nitpicking on something that is totally because of where they grew up or the experiences they had, but then also put some of the ownership on the nominee to say on the written part, please have somebody proofread what you've sent, which can help some of that.
Great. Stacy, is it fair to have all 7 Senate positions uncontested if you really only have the 3 or something that that you feel have to get in there? Is there any way to, then this applies to director as well, is there any way to separate, either separate it or identify, or is there another way to achieve that outcome?
I have not thought about that at this point. No, on the senators, there is no way to do it. We can't, there's no way that we could say we've got 7 positions, these 3 are in, and these 4 positions you're going to vote on with 6 candidates. So we don't have the ability to do that right now.
Right. And it's actually a big discussion, I know, in the past that the nominating committee has had when we're like, this one person, we really need to get this person in for the diversity or for something, for some reason. And there's others that would be just as, It's definitely something the committee struggles with every year.
Right. So take the thing where you've got the 7, these 3 we really need, these 4, they're anybody that gets on the slate we feel really good about, because I'll tell you there's been a lot of discussion. So there's maybe the 4 other spots, and we've got 8 people that would be good, and then we have to have a hard discussion about how do we whittle that down in order to get the 3 that we really need on there. And it's and to get 10 people to agree on that can be pretty challenging. So it's we'll take that question. There is not a way that we know how to do it right now, and I would be
Okay. And there was a follow-up where the person was still a little confused as to how that contested you've got uncontested, but you're saying the nominating committee does not choose the leaders. So
Yeah, so yes, I could see where there would be confusion there. So choosing the leaders would be, we would be choosing them because we like Stacy better, or we want Stacy to be in this position, and we're going to go tap on Stacy's shoulder and say, hey, Stacy, you need to put in an application because we want you to be in this spot. And where we keep going back to, as a committee, what is best for the society? What is best for SWE? And if it's best for SWE that we have these 3 people have got to be in the Senate, they've got to be in the Senate. And it's based on the feedback we've heard from our current SWE leaders about what's needed. And yeah, so I could see where there's that perception of, well, you really are choosing, but we also are looking at what's best for the society, and it's based on all that input that we have about what's needed and how do we fill all those boxes. Because we have a lot of when I say boxes, it's boxes as far as all those people that are on the slate. We have a lot of people that we're filling and trying to get what's best for that. So we keep thinking, I'll tell you, we struggle with the uncontested slate and positions because we know that people want to have a say in that. But your strongest say comes in from the membership feedback. And really to give us that feedback so that we can tell where there could be the best fit. And then where possible, we do have contested, and yeah, that's our goal is to have some contested, but sometimes it just doesn't work out because we are conflicted with this contested versus we can't meet the goals of society if we have contested because some of those people might not get on.
and then there was another follow-up to it about, well, why don't, for those people that you feel have to, why don't you just use either the special senator or the special director position?
Yeah. So those, that is an option, but then it does kind of, it does just kind of put them in this special category versus being elected and brought on board like all of the other positions. And we don't, so let's take people of color, for example. We don't want to just be like, the only way we can get people of color is to have them be appointed by a special senator or special director. We want to be sure that what we're doing is integrating all of these types of diversity into our normal processes. It's also, if we look at special director, the special directors I know have a really big challenge because right now they're usually only on there for 1 year, and they come in and they have a lot of input, and then the president usually gives them some pretty lofty goals to try to do, and so it can be a challenging spot, but that is an option for us. But we think it's stronger if we can get some of those needs through the regular elected positions on the slate.
And just some feedback from the AG groups, the diversity ones, they would prefer the being slated. They feel the special director is saying you're not good enough to be on the slate and have that position. They actually find it upsetting that
Okay.
they have to go that route.
Yeah.
To get it, that the last 2 people of color, on the board were special. There's 2 this year that were special directors, and then before that was a special director, and you have to go back quite a bit.
Right.
You get somebody that is not. So that came out of the AG feedback.
Yeah.
This week, actually.
So it's good that at least we are getting some people of color on the board, but you're right. The fact that we have to go out and have it as a special director, I think points to an area of improvement that we need on our diversity.
So we could probably spend all of the Q&A on this uncontested one. So I want to get a few, because there are still some more follow-ups, but I want to get a few of other questions in. Let's see. What is the average amount of feedback for the positions that you would expect?
And so I'm assuming that what that means is like you're providing feedback on Stacy and 4 people provide feedback. So that's how I'm going to answer it. So what we see is probably, I didn't actually run statistics on this, so this is going to be based on my perception of what I've seen in the past several years. Person might get 5 or 6 people that provide feedback. If somebody gets a lot of feedback, it may be 20 or 25. That sound about right, Heather?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's kind of all over the map because it depends on how much that person will go ahead and, promote, hey, please provide feedback. But we're not getting anybody that's got 100 people providing feedback. We've never seen that.
I think maybe with the president-elect, it may get up to some of the president-elect positions, but most of them.
Yeah.
And the committee is definitely less. Usually
Yeah.
it's a minimal 3 or 10,
Yeah.
maybe 10.
Maybe 10, yeah, or yeah. And yeah.
Okay. And there was a follow-up. So with that member feedback, so if you get like, what happens if you get some like piece of really negative feedback and then, but the rest is like good, or how do you reconcile conflicting feedback?
Yeah. So we have gotten, when somebody doesn't get on the slate and somebody else really wanted them, typically Heather and I will hear about it and they'll say, oh, they probably got, all this negative feedback and you didn't put them on the slate because these 5 people don't like them and they gave negative feedback. So if it's one person that's kind of out to get you, usually that's kind of a flyer because there will be other information that's really complimentary. And it's just like the 2 ends. They're like polar opposites. Those are easy. Those we can kind of tell that person is has an axe to grind, or is just had one bad experience. Because I'll tell you, there's probably not a person in SWE that hasn't missed responding to an email or something like that. And so sometimes people will be like, they didn't respond to my email. But then if everybody else says, oh, they're responsive and they do their commitments, then we're like, okay, this was a one-off, because everybody's going to have some one-offs. Probably one that's a little bit more difficult for us is, let's say there's a committee that had a problem with a person. And maybe there's 5 committees that love this person and had great experience, and there's one committee that really struggled with them. Typically there will be enough information. So that one is hard, because then it's like, okay, sounds like there's something there. And if it's something like, oh, this person was horrible with response time and never got back to us, and then when they did, they were nasty about it. And then there's other feedback that says, this person's great, blah, blah, blah. So what we will usually try to do in that case, because it sounds like there's something there, is usually the feedback is specific enough in that case that we know, oh, it's with a certain committee. And we will do some follow-up calls with, not with the person, because the feedback is confidential, but with somebody who's from that committee and might know the situation, just to find out what the situation is. But then keep in mind, the feedback is not the only thing. So the other tool that we have is the interview. And if there had been a problem with this one committee, sometimes the person may have shared that in their interview and say, I had a personal situation going on, I had a parent that had cancer and I was taking care of them and I struggled with feedback in the past fiscal year or something. So sometimes that'll happen in the interview, and then it lets us know, okay, this negative feedback was coming from here and here's the reason why. So we have, that's when I talk about all of these pieces of information that the nominating committee has, it helps us kind of balance that. So I will tell you, a person does not get removed from the slate just because they got bad feedback. A person doesn't get on the slate because there are so many people that are good and we're trying to pull the ones in that are best for the society. But if there's feedback that's not good, and then they have an interview that's not good, and then they have, their resume is just really doesn't hardly have anything in it. If you've got all these points that are just kind of mediocre, then a person doesn't get on the slate. So, 1 or 2 bad comments is not going to kick a person out.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, there was a question that I think related to that I'm missing. Okay. If a nominee is not slated, does that mean they're not qualified?
Absolutely not. The challenge we have is that they're, like I said earlier, we will not even be talking about a person unless they're qualified. So the qualifications well, the requirements are pretty open. We've intentionally done that in the bylaws and with the governance changes so that we can use more varied experience. But from a qualification standpoint, it really does come down to, we're a big society now and we have incredible talent and incredible people, and you know, all that we've got women that are doing really amazing things and big ambitions and big accomplishments. And so not getting slated doesn't mean that you're not qualified. It just might mean that it wasn't the right year for you with a mix of people, or, you know, there's just a lot of people and we've got to make some tough calls. So I will say it's really hard for us to convey that message when we've got somebody that is good, and you know, I have to make the call and tell them you didn't make the slate, and knowing that they're good but it just wasn't the right year for them and it wasn't the right time for what SWE needed. That's a tough call, and it's tough to hear that too on the other end.
Okay. How does the committee approach the responsibility to keep members who nominate themselves interested in staying in SWE after being rejected for the position they apply?
That's one of the things that I think it's up to the nominating committee to make sure that this is not a demeaning, demoralizing experience. And for some of you that have been through it, you might be, well, you're failing on that, Stacy, because I know some people have not had a good experience with the nominating committee. And hence the reason why we listen to the feedback on the process and make some changes. I mean, one of the things is the way we did some of the notification calls last year. I didn't think they went well. I was like, okay, we can't do this next year. And then we started hearing that, like, these weren't very good. And so part of that is to make sure that we don't, that we do get people back. We've had some successes with that. I mean, we've had people, some of our recent past presidents, where they had applied more than one time before they got on the slate as president-elect. And so but there have been other cases where that hasn't been the case. So I do think that that's why it becomes really critical for us to continue to listen to what's needed on this notification and revise and make it so that it's not so ugly. But bottom line, if somebody doesn't get selected, sometimes people just, there's no good way. Some people take it better than others.
Yeah, I think that was one of the reasons with the president-elect that it went to, one of the many reasons why that position went to an uncontested position in the manual.
Yeah.
That they have to put so much into notifying work, and then all of a sudden they don't get it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I ran, and so this is just for president-elect, but I ran, I was SWE president several years ago, and I ran in a contested election against a very qualified candidate. And, you know, I told my vice president that I was running for this. I got her approval before I put it in. Well, most people don't realize that we've got a 9-month process before you put your name in, before you actually get elected. And, you know, she was already making job changes for me. She was telling people I was going to be SWE president. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like horrible. But so there's just too much publicity about it. But the president-elect being uncontested, I think, has gotten to the point where it's accepted at some of these other positions that we had the chatter about.
So one of the questions we got, if you could publicize or emblazon on a t-shirt one key fact about the nom-com to help with the demystification, what would that be?
Oh my gosh, who asked that question?
I don't remember. We're getting some tough questions over here. There's some really good ones, really good ones.
Yeah, it's like we're not the bad guys or something like that. I don't know. It's, yeah.
We care.
We care. We really do care.
We probably
really,
care too much.
Yes. So, yeah.
We have, I would say that the committee takes its job seriously and really, really works very hard. And we have a lot of information that not everybody knows about,
Right.
you know, because we can't broadcast why necessarily why someone was or wasn't slated, because we do, it's all confidential information.
Yeah. And there's so much information. And so we know so much about these people that when somebody has a chance to vote, they get like one paragraph, and I can't remember if it's a 1 or 2 minute video about them, which is just a little snapshot. And so if you don't know these people, it's very, very little, where we know a lot. And I know that some of the people on the nominating committee have put in to be on the committee because they're like, I didn't understand why, Stacy didn't get on the slate. And then after we see all these people that are putting in, and the caliber of the people and the accomplishments, and then if somebody is really qualified, but they're just kind of in the middle of the pack, it's tough. And so we take it serious. It is a very, very committed committee, and we want to do the right thing. And it's tough because we can't really sometimes defend what we've done. That's why I'm excited to do this webinar, because it's the first time we've done something like this.
And I know I have always been someone who's like, all these slates should be contested. It should always be contested. And then I got on the committee, and during the discussions, I'm like, oh, I see why some are not. And it's really difficult to, because we have really tough conversations during our vetting process.
Yeah.
To try to figure out what's right. And it's not a case of trust. And there were some questions about trusting the society or not. It's not a case of that. It's that, honestly, you guys have like this much info, and we have like this much info. That we know about the candidates. And so we really do try. And then 2 years ago, we had 4 directors for 2 positions, and people were like, well, you have these great people, and now they won't get, 2 of them won't get on the board of directors, and they won't get a committee lead position. The timeline is too long. So we got slammed for that too. So
it's a no-win.
Yes, there's no win. And yeah.
Well, we've got like 3 minutes left. Is there maybe one more question?
Let's see. Trying to find one.
I'm not looking at the chat, but I keep seeing it flashing.
Yeah, no, a lot of it I think we covered from the chat. The t-shirt ideas, we're all in this together. Yep. Is feedback saved from year to year?
Oh, so one of the things, we save it for 1 year, so that if you put in something last year about Stacy, you don't need to retype the same thing in. But after that, we don't save it, because we do want to be sure that people are submitting recent experiences and not something that happened 10 years ago, because people do change and they grow, and if they got feedback, they listen to it. So
yeah.
Okay.
I think the last year we added the comment, like, how old is this feedback?
Yeah.
Because if we could see that the person grew, like took their feedback and made changes, we appreciated that.
All right, so we're going to end. This is being recorded. Thank you so much for all of the questions. That is really great. And like I said, Heather and I are really excited to do this, because we get a ton of questions about our super secret committee, and it's not really meant to be that. Our email is on there. That nominating committee chair goes to Heather and me, so that's good. And then this is our webpage, which we have recently launched, and it does have a lot of these FAQs are on that webpage. So it's under the committee section there on the SWE webpage. But thank you very much. I saw Karen pop in.
Yeah, Karen, is there a way to export the whole the save chat, so I can save some of the things for future FAQs?
Yep. Great. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.